Tom Bauer has never been one for gentle euphemisms, and in his latest salvo, he sets his sights squarely on Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, presenting a series of allegations and observations that, if taken at face value, redraw the contours of a narrative many of us thought we already knew. What Bauer offers in his book and interviews is a forensic, often scorched earth reading of the couple's choices and motives, and whether you read him as a tenacious investigative biographer or a provocateur chasing clicks, there is no denying the drama of the claims. Throughout his recounting, Bauer frames Meghan as a force who, he says, used British privacy laws as both shield and sword, omitted material from his book when the law demanded it, and supposedly harbors a private past so salacious that it was deemed legally risky to publish. He teases that those details exist and were deliberately left out, which, for viewers who relish scandal, feels like being shown the key to a locked room and told the door will be opened in another volume. The insinuation alone is charged. A public figure whose past has been policed by legal constraints, a biographer who hints at explosive material but is handcuffed by statute. The result is a lesson in how stories about celebrities can be shaped not only by what is said, but by what cannot be said. One of the more concrete and eyebrow-raising allegations Bauer levels is about the registration of a domain linked to the couple's newborn, a digital move he portrays as emblematic of a wider commercial strategy. According to him, lawyers acting for Meghan registered a site tied to the Queen's private nickname 2 days before the world learned of the baby's name, and that this preemptive act amounts to an attempt to monetize an intimate royal connection. If true, the timing reads as a business play rather than a private family moment, and Bauer draws that through line: acquire a royal title, harvest the goodwill and recognition that come with it, then convert that capital into a brand back in California. Whether you find the image of a future-focused brand strategist sowing seeds in Buckingham's garden cynical or credible depends on where you sit politically and culturally, but Bauer frames it as part of a pattern, a plan allegedly hatched long before exit strategies were enacted. Bauer is unsparing when it comes to motive. He portrays Meghan not as someone captivated by the rituals and duty of the monarchy, but as someone who saw the institution's cachet as an accelerant for a celebrity career that would ultimately flourish best outside Britain. That thesis is at once simple and severe. The royal title is depicted as a ladder to be climbed and then discarded. In Bauer's version, the monarchy becomes a stage set for brand building. Sentiment and tradition are merely props. He says that Meghan always intended to return to the US not as a settled royal resident, but as a titled outsider, a celebrity endowed with the resonance of a royal connection and the freedom of Hollywood spotlight. This narrative reframes the famous departure to North America as less of a romantic escape and more of a planned transactional migration. The portrait Bauer paints is heavy on ego and theater. He insists that Meghan harbors a self-image that places her on par with Diana, and he interprets certain public choices as evidence of a desire to cultivate that comparison. Jewelry, wardrobe choices, and public appearances are read not merely as stylistic selections, but as acts of symbolic signaling. The wearing of items associated with Diana is, in his view, an attempt to appropriate a legacy rather than inherit it. For Bauer, Diana's careful, slow burn of public affection, earned through visible vulnerability and a long arc of service, cannot be replicated by borrowed signifiers. He frames Meghan's attempts to conjure Diana's aura as a kind of theatrical mimicry, not understanding that Diana's emotional claim on the public was built over time and through hard, often painful work that a few curated photo ops cannot substitute. It's a provocative accusation because it calls into question the authenticity of the emotional and symbolic language that surrounds public figures. Are some people reclaiming legacy, or is legacy being repackaged for consumption? The book also digs into interpersonal drama that took place away from the cameras, but had consequences for social life within Harry's circle. Bauer recounts an episode at Sandringham where he says a clash over jokes led to Meghan's falling out with some of Harry's friends and to a rupture in the broader social fabric that once surrounded him. The scene he describes, a confrontation over what were characterized as sexist jokes, followed by apparent insistence that Harry sever ties with old comrades, reads like a turning point in a relationship where social capital was being recalibrated. Bauer's narrative suggests that the consequences were not merely personal but strategic. By isolating Harry from his network, the couple allegedly reconfigured his social world in a way that made him more dependent on the partnership and less tethered to the British milieu that might have steadied him. Whether readers believe that interpersonal disputes lead to long-term estrangement or see such tensions as inevitable in any high-profile pairing, this chapter of Bauer's critique centers the personal as political, a reminder that private conflicts among the elite have public consequences. Perhaps the most incendiary set of charges is those aimed at credibility and truth-telling. Bauer claims that the Oprah Winfrey interview, which captured global attention and sympathy, contained numerous inaccuracies. He cites a substantial number and frames them as central to a broader pattern of narrative construction. If a public figure can successfully manufacture a victim's story, Bauer suggests, then public sympathy becomes a commodity, and factual consistency is sacrificed for emotional traction. And these are serious claims because they go directly to trust. If a narrative that catalyzed a wave of support was in part built on shaky foundations, then the public conversation about race, belonging, and the treatment of Meghan within the institution is reframed. Bauer's insistence that certain well-publicized elements were untrue is designed to puncture the pathos of that TV moment. And whether you accept his read or not, the charge compels a reassessment of the ways media moments can be engineered and consumed. Bauer doesn't limit his scrutiny to the couple's public statements. He delves into professional clashes too, recounting a fraught episode with British Vogue in which Meghan, acting as guest editor, purportedly overreached, seeking editorial control and clashing with staff and established editors. The account paints a picture of a celebrity used to scripting narratives and expecting media partners to oblige, and it is offered as an example of a pattern. Attempts to control how one is represented, both as an aesthetic and as a story. Those who have worked in editorial spaces may find this unsurprising. Talent demanding control is an old story, but Bauer suggests something more calculated was afoot, an attempt to manage the press so tightly that independent journalism gives way to curated reality. Harry himself is not spared from Bauer's critique. His project to produce a documentary recalling Princess Diana is characterized as misguided, born more from emotional impulse than historical nuance. Bauer argues that Harry's version of his mother's life, filtered through grief and distance, risks simplifying a complex tragedy into a neat narrative pill that aligns with the couple's commercial trajectory. That critique raises interesting questions about the ethics of memory and biography. When a family member pens a public account of a shared trauma, how do we weigh personal perspective against the demands of historical accuracy? Bauer's impatience with what he calls Harry's eagerness to narrate his mother's life is less about the validity of mourning and more about the fidelity of memory when it enters the marketplace. Scattered through Bauer's depiction are accusations of opportunism and strategic calculation. He suggests that appearances at high-profile events are not always organic choices, but often carefully timed moves meant to restore relevance or signal a certain class of access. He points to instances where attendance or absence seemed timed to maximize advantage, labeling certain appearances as desperate grabs for attention rather than genuine gestures of engagement. For detractors, such readings make sense. In a world where visibility is currency, timing is everything. For supporters, such interpretations risk reducing human behavior to transactional calculations and stripping choices of their complexity. One claim that reverberates particularly loudly is Bauer's contention that parts of Meghan's past were exaggerated or fabricated to construct a narrative of lifelong activism and principled resistance. He revisits the oft-told anecdote of a childhood letter to a major corporation protesting sexism and reports that the evidence for that that story does not withstand scrutiny in his account. By interrogating small but emblematic stories, the kind that stitch together an arc of moral purpose from childhood to adulthood, Bauer aims to show how persona is constructed, sometimes on foundations that do not hold up to independent checks. The implication here is less about whether one anecdote occurred than about a pattern in which personal myth-making can be a tool in building a public identity. Reading Bauer is to inhabit a space of deliberate antagonism. He writes with the conviction of someone who believes he is peeling back artifice to reveal a raw, unglamorous truth. He is uncomfortable with narratives that elevate emotion into unassailable truth, and his approach is to puncture that elevation wherever he sees it. Whether his barbs land as revelations or as tendentious opinion will depend largely on the reader's prior orientation toward Meghan and Harry. Seeing these allegations now, the questions they provoke feel almost more interesting than the answers Bauer urges readers to accept. What responsibility do public figures owe to institutions that grant them status? How does one weigh human complexity against sharp moral claims? Is performance always proof of calculation? And perhaps most tricky, how do we, as observers and consumers of celebrity narratives, decide what to accept when the stories we are told are so emotionally persuasive? Bauer's book does not offer tidy solace. Rather, it pushes readers to interrogate the allure of sympathetic storytelling and the ease with which it can become unfairly weaponized.